Doctors of Reddit, what's the biggest case of faking it you've ever seen? Dermatologist here. Patient was convinced she had a melanoma and needed a biopsy and would need to be on workers' comp. I told her it looked like ink from a marker. She demanded a biopsy. I wiped the area off with an alcohol swab and showed her the ink and that there was no spot on her skin anymore. She stormed out threatening to sue. I'm just glad I cured her melanoma. Had a patient come in for a fall who now couldn't move their legs at all. Did a bunch of tests, didn't find anything. The patient was not at all fazed by suddenly being paralyzed, which was the first red flag. Didn't really believe anything was wrong, but the patient was still not moving their legs. My options are to admit for a huge workup or get them to walk. So I update them saying everything is fine, tests are negative, you can go home. Patient gets up, gets dressed and walks out without a word. We had a patient faking a seizure, so my supervisor told one of us to get the brain needle. The patient made a miraculous and swift recovery without intervention. Physical therapist here. Working mom comes into the clinic with her infant in a stroller. She's limping like she's got a nail in her foot. Wincing in pain and tears in her eyes. She's crying during her visit with the PT. None of us think she's faking it. She limped out of the clinic. I glanced out of the window and saw this woman bounding down the sidewalk. Hips swaying, full stride, going places. We were all fools. Whenever we had kids, usually teenagers, playing up their symptoms to extend their hospital stay, we would order them into a healthy lifestyle. Lights out at 9, no screen time for 2 hours before bedtime, healthy diet chock full of fruits and vegetables, screen time limits, minimum number of laps around the unit per day to get in their exercise. They got better so much faster with our healthy lifestyle tips. My brother was an EMT for 2 years and he told me this. People will try to use the ambulance as a means for transportation from Fulton to Oswego because the hospital is in Oswego, by faking seizures. Sometimes when the head EMT guy was feeling fun and knew that the person was faking, he'd say something like, "Man, it's weird that he's having seizures but not peeing himself." Apparently the person would kind of snap out of it for a second, weigh up the repercussions, then either pee themselves or stop faking. I thought that was hilarious. Sorta along the same idea. Working at a pharmacy, we saw a guy come in to try and get a refill on some pain meds that had no refill. After pleading that his ear really hurt, we told him again we couldn't refill it. One of the other employees saw his step into a side hallway and take a pencil and jam it forcefully into his ear repeatedly, drawing blood. He calmly left and went to the ER. He came back a few hours later with a prescription for pain meds. Had a patient when I was an intern feigning blindness. She would constantly be playing on her smartphone, only furiously trying to hide it when someone from the care team came into her room. The best was when my attending one day strolled past her room and threw his hand up in a highly exaggerated hello wave. She started to throw her arm up but caught herself halfway through, then threw her hand back into her lap and pretended to be staring off into nothing. One time my roommate, who was an ICU nurse, came to see one of my indoor soccer games. During the game, a player on the other team went down hurt and starting screaming in pain and swearing and rolling around while holding his ankle before he was eventually helped off the field. He then limped over to where the fans sat and watched the rest of the game brooding in silence before he left early. After the game, my roommate told me he was going to go over and see if there was anything he could do to help, until he saw that the guy was limping on the wrong leg. Ophthalmology technician. People pretend to be blind all the time. Go to check their eye pressure with the ton opener device you poke them directly into the eye with and they go, "What the fuck is that thing?" Guy came to ER. I was a nurse at the time. For stomachache, when asking him about history, he randomly mentions a fight with his girlfriend where she left in a tizzy and he fell asleep on the couch. 20 minutes later, when we see the CT, he has a satellite cable remote wrapped in a condom lodged in his rectum. I suppose he intended to frame her. Didn't get to hear the conversation he had with the doctor. I was curious how he was going to explain why she was nice enough to wrap it in the condom. ER nurse. Bringing a patient back to a room who said he had kidney stones. I had him stop at the bathroom and get a urine sample. Dude comes out with the specimen cup that literally has a piece of concrete in it. Looked him in the eye expecting some sort of joke. He was serious. I threw it away and walked his dumbass back to the waiting room to contemplate his stupidity. I'm a surgery resident. When I was on my trauma rotation, we had a patient come in after an MVC, with question that maybe the patient had seized and that had caused the accident. So he's in the trauma bay, and starts shaking. The trauma nurse goes, "Oh, this isn't a real seizure." And the patient stops shaking, sits up, turns to the nurse, and yells, "You don't know a fucking thing about me." Not a doctor, but I was in the ER one night and there was a seeking drug addict who literally only acted in pain when there was staff around. You ever see those videos where the little kid is fine and then they spot a parent and then bawl, then immediately stop and be fine when the parent is out of view? Exactly like that. Sat fine, no movements or wincing or noises, then wailing when a nurse was in the same vicinity, then back to fine when they left. Not a doctor but nurse. I once read a specialist's consultation report, and at the end of the report the actual diagnosis given was fictitious ailment. Prisoner came in with signs and symptoms of a big stroke. At that time the protocol was to get a non-contrast head CT to rule out a bleed and then give TPA, a powerful clot-busting drug that's only worth the risk if the benefit is to mitigate a major stroke. So that's what happened. Later in the course he got a little carried away and started embellishing his story with symptoms that didn't make sense with his stroke diagnosis, and that's how we figured out he was faking it just to get some time away from jail. My mom was an emergency room nurse. Years ago they brought a prisoner from the local pen in who seemed to be unconscious. The guards were suspicious that he was faking it. They checked his vitals and everything seemed to be okay. The attending doctor tried poking him in the foot with something pointy, nothing. Then he got an idea. They took a rubber hose and inserted it in the back of his throat as if they were intubating him. That did the trick. He sat up very quickly, coughing and gagging. Edit yes, sternum rub, got it. Not me, but know an army doctor who prescribed everyone with cold-like symptoms or sore legs to stay in bed for the whole day. Then next day half as many people with symptoms showed up. When I was a kid I learned I could fake sick and get out of school. So 1-2 days a week I would get a migraine and hold my head and complain, and I would get to go home. Eventually my parents took me to a neurologist who said maybe you just don't let him eat chocolate and sugar. I admitted to faking and was grounded for a long time. I saw a father and his son wink when I was turning to face them again when I was done writing a note to stay home from school. That's pretty much it. Faking it is a hard call to make in general. When I was a kid I used to fake sick for no other reason than I wanted to stay home and hang out with my grandpa. He knew exactly what I was doing and would 90% of the time make me go off to school. We lived with him. Every so often though, he'd wink at me and would convince my mom I was feverish and then spend the day together watching movies and being best buddies. I was like 9 or 10. I cherish those days because he passed away when I was 19, now 31. I would give anything for one more of those days. My mom's an ER nurse and she said once some crazy lady came in and complained she had the whooping cough. And whenever she coughed she followed it with a loud whoop. No doctor, but a funny story from work a couple years ago. Guy calls in sick for around 8 days, says on the phone he is really sick. Comes back to work the next week, turned as FCK. This dude hands a medical slip to the manager written in Spanish. On the slip there is an official seal from some random Cuban clinic. X200B. Guy walks over to me with a grin on his face saying, "Yeah, I'm probably fired." He was